everybody for the parallel sessions in the orange room, the Rabobank room. We've got several speakers here this morning, and also in the parallel sessions in the afternoon. JeanPaul will do his speech again. JeanPaul will kick off as one of our main speakers in several events earlier. In his, well, I'm not going to say award-winning speech, but already with his 7 questions of testing. I hope you all enjoy it. JeanPaul?
Good morning. A quick and dirty introduction for those who do not know me. Well, I'm JeanPaul Varwijk. I am one of the test managers at Corporate Printing IT. And alongside the stuff I do at Rabobank, I have an extended hobby, and that is to write and talk about testing. And I'm going to be brutally honest, I have done this one 4 times before. And the first time was a slightly bigger audience at Eurostar with 280 people. And I won 2nd place as best speaker, which annoyed me because I wasn't first. I've rewritten it slightly, because it doesn't look anything like the Eurostar thing anymore. Let's kick off. Reason I wrote this talk was that the traditional methodologies didn't quite cut it for me. I felt, in theory, it looks very good. TMAP is 480 pages of information, which to some extent actually makes sense, but in actual practical use, I only looked up the test techniques chapter occasionally, and the rest I tried to ignore as much as possible, because it didn't really link to what I was actually doing while working as a tester. I think ISTQB is, next to TMAP, the other traditionally structured test methodology. It's larger than TMAP, is more well known, it's more extensive, and I think if you want to do something with a methodology, this might probably be the better way to approach it. What I dislike about ISTQB is their certification scheme. Basically, they want your money. They have something to tell. There are 25 writers of ISTQB or the new ISO that they've written recently. And they're all very professional, but they also want your money. And then at some point 3 years ago, I fell in love with Scrum. I thought, well, hey, I really like the way that Agile approaches development, to make it iterative and really focus on delivering value fast. And these 3 kind of threw me back a bit. So how do I approach testing? And then I met Huib Schoons. Most of, well, a few of you will know him. He was a business line manager, trim manager here. And he got me hooked on context-driven testing. And basically what this was my personal attempt to mold context-driven testing into a small framework of 7 questions. And just an overview, the 7 questions that I'm going to address is: why do I test? What will I test? What questions do I have? What do I already know? When have I achieved my goal? What have I tested? And what if I do not know how to go further? And I'll just kick off with the why do I test part. I think that's probably the most important question that you have to ask yourself as a tester. And for 2 reasons. There is the existential one to so why am I a tester? I'm not going to address this. That's too personal, and everybody should make their own choice in doing that. What I'm going to talk about is that you should be aware of that you are testing something for somebody else, and why are you doing that? what is the intent of the test. For most people, it seems to be to find bugs, and that's all very fine. And I do think that for testing purposes, it's very essential to find bugs, because that's where we make ourselves the most visible initially, and most bugs are also very visible for users. But as W. Dijkstra already said in '69, you can prove that there are bugs, but you cannot prove that there are no bugs. This actually is considered to be the reason that it's called bug in the first place. I've forgotten her name, but it was a room-size computer where a relay failed to switch, and the programmer went into the room and found a bug in between the mechanical relay, and hence the term bug became popular. I think if you want to answer the question, why do I test, is that it probably is also to fulfill a demand. Especially here in Rabobank, I think something that we really have to consider is that there are internal demands. We are forced maybe to comply to certain standards and procedures, and we should be aware of that. That should influence the way we test. It should not influence the way, the outcome necessarily, but the representation of what we're going to do is influenced by that, and therefore we should be aware of that. And there are always external demands, laws, regulations, and also competition. For most testing purposes, the software is fulfilling a business demand, and for most companies, that means that they want to have a cutting edge. But how good those reasons might be, I think that in the end, what you deliver is meaningful information. And the information should be about the development itself, the behavior of the software, and make that relevant to the stakeholder. Because not all stakeholders want the same kind of information. Their context is not always the same. And what is meaningful for you, because it's critical, you cannot test anymore, might mean nothing to the listener. Now, what will I test? And the most heard answer to that is you test the requirements. But that's really vague, isn't it? What are requirements? To a lot of people, requirements are just the documents. They're written out use cases or user stories or what have you, something on paper. But what you should remember is that whatever there's written on paper is a reflection of somebody's wish or need. And that's not the same as what the paper says. So you should make the effort and actually ask them. And I've been in this bank for an awful long time, and since 2004 as a tester. Take my 10th year. And in many projects I see testers just making their own interpretation. And they all know that assumptions are killing, but they do make them. And sometimes they do that because they cannot reach the people that actually have set the needs and features or written requirements even. But you should be aware that a document is just a document and that is nothing more than a document. So if you get a chance to talk to the people behind it. And for a lot of software, the software is replacing the old software. People were using that. It had its benefits. And try and figure out what those benefits were. Because if you want the new software to be helpful and make it acceptable for users to actually do something with it, try and figure out what they liked about the old software or disliked, so that you don't get that into the new software again. And software is almost never an end goal. It's a means to an end. It's a solution for a problem. So what was the problem? And why would software be the solution? I think that was still at Rabobank Netherlands. We were going to build something for groenbankieren. And eventually a couple of testers got together amongst myself, and we asked, why would anybody want to do that on a form on the internet? Because that's information that's already available. So why is it beneficial to reload that? So we asked, why did you not just build an XML and import that from SQL? Oh yeah, we can do that. Oh, but I've always designed it this way because it's standalone software. No, it's not. It's somewhere in the bank environment, so why not use it? So the solution got a lot simpler because we didn't have to put up an extra database. And that's something testers can think about, because not everybody knows their surroundings or their environment. And what was the intent? The intent was to actually sell an investment portfolio, not to get client information. That information was already available. To get from the requirements or whatever you have used as information source to testing, you have to formulate test ideas to make that part of the information to something that makes you do something to the software. And a test idea is basically a brief statement about a test that could be performed. Test idea could be is that simplest one, I'm going to check if special characters can or cannot be used in this field. And getting a list of those ideas, and sometimes just at random, out of experience, ignoring the actual requirements, helps you not to forget what you are supposed to be testing. And there are lots of sources to do that. Heuristics are very popular, the context-driven testing school, and heuristics basically phrase something like, as a rule of thumb, you should do this or not do that. And if you Google on it, I think by now you get over 100 of them. Do that. Just get ideas on what to do. Especially in Agile, this is very popular. Just to get test ideas, test scenarios as a list, and then, okay, this is relevant to the piece of software that I'm testing. If it is, how would I test that? How would I make that into a test? And how would I know that it actually means something? More traditionally, well, there are the documents. More traditionally, there is what team at ISTQB gave us, the quality attributes, security, usability, and stuff like that. That's all relevant. It's all part of getting ideas what to do to the software. A thing that's sometimes forgotten is what were previous bugs. Do I know somebody that tested a similar piece of software, and what bugs did he find or she find? Your own experience, obviously. I think at Risk IT there is a lot of data warehouse stuff. I got at clock thinking and noted that, oh, this is an Oracle database. It works differently. Why does it work differently? One of the things I found was that I asked OFSS, why are you using a data type that you on your website declare obsolete for the last 2 years? And you even deliver migration scripts for it. Why do you not do that in our software? And they still have to answer. So test ideas, getting a list of things to do in software and to how to test that is very essential in getting a notion of what you will test. But that is all very dependent on what you already know, and even more dependent on what you don't know. And that's difficult. And sometimes you do know that you don't know, sometimes you don't. Also on what you are able to find. Update. And you know how to look for it. When I first started testing data warehouses, I knew nothing about them. Well, I knew something about tables and stuff. I had been browsing on the database. The data warehouse is completely a different entity. It's much larger. It has different types of tables and a lot of different types of data in it. And at first I just didn't see bugs that I now would find instantly. So learning how to approach your software, how to go beneath the bonnet and open up the lid and then say, okay, this is happening in the software, and now I do understand it. And then there's the final step. Even if you find something, can you make the connection to the actual test and requirements? If you see something and you don't think it's a bug because you do not connect to what the user will do with it or what the functionality means to the software in the end result, that doesn't help you either.
JeanPaul, can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
If you go back, I already know is an important factor. To what extent, in your opinion, is it needed that a tester is already knowledgeable within the domain? Does it help him or is it a burden?
I think there's a threefold answer. First answer would be, I think it's the green answer. It doesn't matter. And to a large extent, it really doesn't matter. It's if you know your craft and you have a good testing skill set, you can approach any kind of software at any time. Having said that, to make what you do meaningful, it helps that you know what the software actually does and means to the business. And like I said, if you cannot make the connection, for instance, I think recently we were testing something and it calculated with 2 decimals. And I knew by experience, hey, that's not a bank norm. A bank norm is 5 decimals. Everything should be 5 decimals and always. Only the representation is 2 decimals. And on an interest statement, that meant that there was a difference of 2 cents. Doesn't mean much. But if a account owner sees that statement and recalculates it for himself, and he notices that there is a 2 cent difference in the end balance, he doesn't cross the rest anymore, even if 2 cents doesn't mean anything to him. So then you have to know, okay, in the banking domain, counting is different. Knowing why you do a purchase or why you calculate stuff helps to look for certain problems. And the third part, the threefold answer is domain can also be a burden. Because if you are very knowledgeable about the domain, that also gives you tunnel vision. I'm not seeing stuff that is outside of the domain. So, yeah.
So it helps, but it can be a burden.
Yeah. I think you should have at least basic knowledge. Personally, but that's almost between you and me, I think every tester should do at least a basic training on a domain that he's working in. But to really know what you are going to test, you also need to know your testing stuff. So you have to be proficient in the use of test techniques. Almost all testers in the Netherlands at some point will have done a TMAP or an ISTQB course, and in the foundation exam there are questions about test techniques, and as soon as they get the certificate, they forget half of them, they only use a quarter of them, and probably at some point in their life there are only 2 that they actually use. And most of the time it are the 2 simplest ones, doing syntactical or semantical tests, which in my opinion any developer should have automated a long time ago. So keeping the testing techniques alive and practicing them, even if you do not have to use them on the subject at hand, helps you be a better tester, because it makes you think of more possibilities. I think knowing what other professions think of testing alongside the more testing-oriented methodologies is how does Agile perceive testing? For instance, the testing quadrants also helps. It also helps to look completely outside of traditional testing and go and talk to people who do embedded systems. Okay, because they do not understand that anybody can test the way we test. Because for them, regression is not an option, it has to be right. If I think a friend of mine was working on a probe for Parkinson's patients where they literally stuck a needle in a brain and stimulated areas of the brain. There's no second possibility to do that. It has to be right. So testing that is really a challenge. And what I also very, very much like is that the concept of try, do not repeat yourself. Oftentimes you see test scripts that go to a certain state of the software and repeat the same steps all over again to get there. To get there might be the purpose, but if you need that state 3 or 4 times, try and get there in different ways, and that by using different values or different routes, so that while you are getting there to the place in the software where you actually want to test, you already rerun tests on the functionality that you thought you had covered before. Bearing that in mind, I also think that separation of concerns is important, meaning that if you test something, make sure that you're knowledgeable of the fact that while sending inputs to the software or creating the state, you are doing other stuff. You actually want to test this feature, be aware that you are not triggering other features that influence that, the outcome. And even if they do, you cannot avoid it, be aware that you are doing that. So that the interpretation of a bug that you see there might not be that the actual feature is in fault, but the input was in fault that you created along the way. And I really like these two. No user would do that. Users do stuff we cannot imagine. And of late, under time pressure, business really likes to ignore this. I think the best phrase I heard when I got to coffee training was, "Why are you testing this? That's a hypothetical test case." And I thought, wasn't that the point of me testing, to make hypotheses and check if they actually have a result? And the yakni is, you ain't gonna need it, is something I got back from a couple of developers that said, it doesn't work, but you ain't gonna need it anyway. Doesn't matter. Let's leave the bug in. Nobody will ever go with that part of the software. Right, I got there, so why not everybody else? So you know why you are testing, you have test ideas, And then you get to the point where you think, okay, what questions do I actually have? How am I going to do my work? And I have a small, I've written a small mnemonic called bit attest. And the things that you might want to know is, in the way you approach your test, are the developers actually available? If they are in India, you can less likely talk to them regularly than if they are sitting next to you. How soon do I have access to information? If I want to prepare my test and I get the information I need just 5 minutes in front, that doesn't really help me. This one is sometimes really difficult, is do you control the test data? Am I capable of creating my own test data? And am I the owner of that data? Or do I actually need a production company? And does the company need to be unrecognizable? Or not? By law it should, but by practice I know it's hardly ever. And a really valuable source of information are the analysts. They represent the users in your team. In a typical waterfall environment, by the time you get to testing, they are already ahead and working on the next project cycle, and they are not really available. They might be even sitting in your team, but they're working on something else, and they're not focusing on your question. So they have to rethink and go back. That's why I like agile teams. Pick up a work item, work on it together. So availability is relative. It might even be that they're not here, but they might also be here and absent anyway. Well, another thing to consider is, are you the only tester or are there other testers? And if you are not the only tester in your department, can you approach the other testers? Or are there project managers who get nervous if you go and ask questions 3 times per day walking around the building? Another thing that is relevant in most Dutch offices is that you have a quiet work environment. Sometimes you just want to be working and not get disturbed. Not have a phone ring, not have a loud conversation a few meters away from yourself. I do think that if you compare RI with RN, I love the idea of RN to have quiet rooms and go and close the door, and I can do a test charter of 2 hours and not get disturbed by anybody. I haven't been able to do that here. Are the stakeholders available? The people that you actually work for? Sometimes we think that we are working for a project manager or a line manager, but we actually do develop software for somebody else. Are they available to answer questions or to clarify? And this is actually a double one. Is there tooling? Can I actually do the stuff that I want to do? And the other side is there mandatory tooling? For instance, now everybody likes us to use TFS and Microsoft Test Manager. That has a certain workflow. It might have limitations. Be aware of those. And if you have any other questions, I've been thinking about that one. You can have a lot of questions, but I couldn't phrase those into a few slides, so I thought, well, the best thing you can do is to actually go up to somebody and ask questions. I cannot perceive what questions you will have if you face a new assignment. You are in a new project. Just think of the question and not think the answer will go. I will get the answer by myself, or it will come to me, or if I go to the next chapter of the requirements, I will probably know it. Go and ask. Be a nuisance to some extent. a little bit into the domain question earlier. What do I already know? Domain knowledge. So if you know what the domain is actually about, if you know about, for instance, I'm currently privately testing for Nike, and I know that they want to deliver a new web shop to the Netherlands. I know their purpose, so I know, okay, what do I know about web shops? So I look that up, and what makes that important to them. Having tool knowledge helps. I found myself having used Microsoft SQL Server for a long time, and now I'm at the Oracle database. And okay, this has new commands. I have to master this tool again. Even if I know what to do, what I want to do to the database, I don't know how to do it. Having said that, it also helps, I think testers should be aware of the fact that they are actually working in IT. And that means that people are programming stuff, querying databases. You should be proficient in actually, to some extent, do that yourself and use and understand the code. That doesn't mean that you have to be a brilliant programmer. If you were going to be that, you probably would be a developer. You're perfectly allowed to be just a tester, but it helps that you know that in certain, in Python, functions are different than in C#. And that means that developers make different choices. If you're long enough into testing, you know what kind of bugs are more likely to be in software. If you know the developer, you also know what kind of bugs he's more likely to create. And then to have knowledge about the method that you're. So what kind of software development do we do here? We're now aiming to do Agile, close to Scrum. That means that there's a certain way of doing things. Knowing how things are done helps you to raise the question at the right time. And having said all that, those are not, I want to point out, those are not sequential questions. Those are questions you should ask continuously in parallel, and they influence each other. Go and rerun everything those questions, and every information you get is make you think, okay, I thought we were testing this because of regulation so-and-so, but we actually want new clients. That means, oh, maybe that means that I have to rethink how I'm going to test that feature. And then maybe a more difficult one is when are you actually finished? And there's a long list of possibilities, and I just make a small word cloud out of it. The most common reason that you finish testing is that you are at the end of your time slot. Because testing never stops. There's always something to test. But that's not a very nice one. I really like the piñata heuristic, which basically means, if you know what a piñata is, it's a small donkey they use in Mexico. It's full of candy, and the game is to have a blindfolded child tries to hit the donkey, and it breaks open. The candy falls out, and as long as it keeps on hitting and the candy drops out, it is allowed to eat that candy later on. And the piñata heuristic just says, keep on hitting the software as long as you like. If no candy comes out anymore, or bugs come out, you should probably stop hitting. This one is also a nice one. You have thought of a lot of test ideas, and you are testing stuff, and you cannot think of more test ideas. Well, let's stop testing that, because you're no longer productive. You can spend a lot of time on it, and maybe then this one applies. The post that refreshes, if you take a break, and go back a few days later to the same part of the software you might have emailed use. This one, I'm glad to say I've hardly ever encountered. The dead horse heuristic means that the software is really so bad you could start testing it, but if you find $100 in the first day, you'll probably find another 100 in the second day, and there's no point to do that. Let's first make the software better, and maybe, and I don't think many testers really do that. Just walk away and say, I'm not going to test this. This is so bad. Go and do your work again. Waar zijn we voorbij?
Je hebt nog 5 minuten.
5?
15.
Now, what have I tested? A part that is important because it actually displays to others what you have done. Bugs are very visible, but test cases also. I think test cases should have meaningful descriptions. So if you have a one-liner on a test case, it should represent you and everybody else who's looking at the test case what you are actually going to test. But I also think if you have results from a test case, do not deliver black box results, meaning, and I think I occasionally do that, maybe too often, but you have a test case and the result is pass or fail. It doesn't actually say what you did, nor what the result was, why you think it passed or failed. The annoying part of it is that if you do that, you're considerably slower than if you do pass-fail. But the level of information is much higher. And I think this one I've done talks about is actually this part alone is that test cases should have the possibility to be reused. And not only for regression, but also as a base to variate on. And they should be auditable. So they should be traceable back to the original requirement, the questions that you are going to answer, tie back to the software. I think we are trying to achieve that here at Rabobank International now with DFS. But you still have to do that right and actually believe in doing that. I think audit will be more prominent than ever the coming years, and they will be more nasty even in the questions they ask. So do yourself a favor and be aware that the results and the test cases should be auditable. And not have somebody else coming up next year and asking you questions on the project that you only remember half of, and you cannot find why you did stuff. And I think you should store your testware in a way that it makes sense, so make logical distinctions. Choose. My personal favorite is to organize it along features, but sometimes people prefer to make it a complete distinction between functional and non-functional, or the declare test objects parts of the software that you can reach independently. I don't really care what distinction you make, but just be logical about it. Make it known why you make that distinction and stick to it. Bear in mind, any way you slice it means that you still have to make to get a complete picture. So maybe just as a mind game, slice it in a different way and see if there's parts of the software or the requirements that you have in the other division that you don't have in your own. And then test reports. I know we have a test policy template. Wouter was very prominent in that one because it bears your name as an author.
Yeah.
I just noted again yesterday. It's good to stick to the template, but still be aware is that the intent is not to fill a template, but to provide information to somebody. Now that information might be relevant just to a certain stakeholder, but for instance, you have business users and support, and they have sometimes opposite interests, at the least different. So you could consider to actually, maybe I should write a test report where I provide information to the business users so that they can decide if you want to go live or not. And maybe I should write a test report to support, just stating all the stuff that went wrong and where the problems were solved out and how we work around it, so that they can do their work better once users start asking questions. The latter would not be very favorable to deliver to end users or senior users, but basically you're telling what's still not very optimal. Maybe they don't want to know. Often they don't want to know, actually. Remember why you started testing in the first place. You were asked to deliver an answer, so deliver that answer to that question. Make a decision up front on how often you want to convey information and in which way. If you do it in the team, a dashboard might work. If you do it to your project manager and your product owner, a weekly progress report might do it. And if you deliver it to all the other stakeholders, that report might not just be sufficient. A good thing to do is to be aware of what the actual procedures are here at Rabobank and actually ask, regardless of the procedure, go and ask how often they want their information. Sometimes they don't want the information weekly, sometimes they do want it daily. Especially if the project is getting into a tight spot. They want to know sometimes hourly how they're doing. And you have to figure out how to deliver that without getting a nuisance to somebody else and getting annoyed yourself. Not often. Have I done that? Yeah, I've done that. Hourly reports. And then the only thing that I said, well, I'm only going to give you the deltas. And I'll give you an overview at the end of the day. If I'm going to restate everything hourly, it will take me 10 minutes per hour. These are examples actually in use here at Rabobank. Here, anonymous, so they're empty. And last question is, what if I do not know how to go further? Well, 5 minutes, perfect. I'll speed up a little bit. We might think that we're doing unique things, but it's very likely that the same problem was stated somewhere else and somebody wrote a solution for it, so that software was already developed somewhere else, unless you are really unique. Then maybe you shouldn't work here. Right? I mean, if you invented Candy Crush, you should make a fortune somewhere else, maybe. But a lot of the things that we face are solutions to questions that have been asked before. So go and ask around. I always say make Google your friend. There's a lot of information on the internet. Go and ask your community. I'm on Twitter, and occasionally I have a question that I do not know how to test something. I just throw it onto Twitter, and it hasn't failed me yet. So So I've always gotten an answer that I could actually use. There are a lot of forums and communities on LinkedIn and Google+. Unfortunately, in my experience, large majority are Indians. And they have certain ideas that do not really appeal to me, and their style of discussion is somewhat puzzling. Well, that's maybe more personal. A very large community in the Netherlands is Testnet with 1,700 members, and with 2 major events per year, one in spring and one in the autumn, and 6 to 8 events during the year for work groups and smaller theme nights. If you've never been there, you can learn a lot. Sometimes if you go there regularly, you find that maybe a quarter of the speakers appear very frequently and hardly deliver anything new, but still it's best to experience that at first hand and then make your decision. If you're a member of Testnet, you can also go to KFIF, an acronym I forgot the actual words of, but that's the Belgian counterpart, who usually meets in Antwerp, so that's relatively close, and they have a totally different set of people presenting and a slightly different view on testing anyway. There is, for instance, the Association of Software Testing. That's a US-based association. They deliver a lot of information, and maybe the most valuable thing they do is they provide BBST courses, backwards software testing courses, which are, even if you're testing for 5 years or longer, the foundation one is already challenging. It's 4 weeks of 10 to 15 hours per week investment, talking. I think there's one individual assignment you deliver on Thursday, and a group assignment on Wednesday, and a quiz and an exam at the end. The group assignments are really a challenge because what they do is, this is a global course. They preferably mix you with somebody in the US and somebody in Oceania, and you're in Europe in the middle. So figure out how you are going to communicate to each other at the same time and actually deliver something. And I know one of the instructors. I talked to him after I did the second course, look at literacy, and he said, well, actually, there are always, there's a lead instructor and 3 other instructors, but we always have 20 other people monitoring the information flow, and we can see everything you do online whilst logged in, and we have an opinion about that. If you are within bounds, you will not notice. If you are out of bounds, you will notice. And I've spoken to a few people that did that on conferences, and they said, well, all of a sudden I got a pop-up, or I got a mail, or somebody rang me. The exam is really tough. You get 200 questions in advance, of which you have to do 30. You get 3 hours. 15 of those are really short and 15 are long. And knowing them in advance doesn't really help. Because what they say, oh, you knew them in advance, so we expect serious answers. I think, last evening I went to a meetup of the Federation of Agile Testing. Israel is cheap. Most of the time it's free. And I read blogs. There are a lot of testers who love to write. But the best one is, you're working at a bank where there are testers, ask them. And this one doesn't really apply to this event maybe, but to in a larger event, there are a lot of speakers with nothing else to do for the rest of the week once they have spoken than to be spoken to. And finally, this I did the first time I did it, I only had 7 questions, and I realized the 8th question is, okay, if I have answers to all those questions, what have I actually learned? And we have